Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Issues and Updates meeting for January 3rd, 2024. County Administrator Gary Schmidt, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Commissioner Schrader is on her way, and when she joins, whether in person or on Zoom, we'll let you know. All other commissioners are present. Chair, would you please convene as the Development Agency of Clackamas County?
I will recess as the Board of County Commissioners and convene as the Development Agency Board.
This is request for consent agenda for the Development Agency. Item 1, approving termination of a disposition and development agreement with Sam Allen Motel Properties and One Monarch Center. No fiscal impact, no county general funds are involved. Dan Johnson, Director of Transportation and Development, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair Smith. Commissioners, this is a simple housekeeping step. Just to kind of enlighten you, we had the work of the Development Agency. We get into various disposition and development agreements. Those documents get recorded, so when title searches are done, they pop up on a title search. Essentially, this is an action we're taking on behalf of Sam Allen and his interests in that area to basically do a more formal process to just kind of acknowledge the fact that all the objectives within this DDA have timed out. The DDA is no longer needed, and basically clear up title on those various properties that were encumbered by that DDA, which encumbered properties he was interested in, properties that we had held at the time. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions or comments? Commissioner Savas?
Dan, he did acquire one property, right?
Yes, he did. Okay. And that was one of the properties that was encumbered by the DDA. And so that's kind of what brought up the topic originally regarding the title research on that particular site. And again, all this is simply kind of a quick claim, mutual acknowledgement, we're all good. So if any third party interested individual were to look at the title report, they would see this document then on the title report as well.
I know that was an important acquisition for him, and so everything's settled, he's good,
yep.
We're good.
Yep, just housekeeping cleans it up.
Okay, great, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Seeing no objections.
Thank you. Chair, would you please reconvene as the Board of County Commissioners?
I will recess as a Development Agency and reconvene as the Board of County Commissioners.
Next is request for consent agenda for the Board of County Commissioners. Finance Department is first. Item 1, approval of a personal services contract with Barry, Dunn, McNeil, and Parker for countywide federal grant compliance and subrecipient monitoring. Agreement value not to exceed $305,000 over 1.5 years. Funding is through the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, where allowed, and departmental cost allocations, which does include a small portion of budgeted county general funds. Elizabeth Comfort, Finance Director. Joseph Rosevere, Grants Manager. Welcome, please.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. So this contract before you is new going out. We've had this contract or this service with us with an employee for 5 years from 2016 to 21, and then we went out for an RFP when that employee left our employment, and then we did hire that same employee as a contractor for the last 2 years. So this is actually going out to a new contractor, and they will be assisting us in aligning our systems and processes between both federal and non-federal subrecipient contracts. To give you an idea of the dollars that run through, federal grants that run through this are about $7 million as of last year, and then non-federal are $15 million for 2023. This company also has 29 clients of a long list of clients just in Oregon, and they include Washington, Lane, Marion, and Yamhill counties, and have a deep bench of staff that can assist us. The first 6 months is going to be a heavy lift. They have a lot of processes and manuals in place that they'll be assisting us with and getting to know the county and our operators. The reason it's a 1.5 year contract is we want to test them out because we have had this really close to our vest, this service, and we want to see how this works. And then we do have 3 years of options, 1 year each to extend. And we'll also be considering, do we want to bring this service back in-house? Because this is a very personal service that we work with our community members and our departments, and so we like to have a lot of hands-on. So this will be a test over the next 1.5 years, as well as I said, help us really professionalize and streamline our processes.
So this is a service that we're contracting out for a company to come in and review how we do grants. Is that right? When we do a subrecipient, so explain what a subrecipient is for the folks listening.
Definitely. Joseph Roseberg, Grants Manager. There are three core areas that the compliance and subrecipient monitoring consultant supports. The first is, as you requested, a subrecipient is when we receive funds and we're passing them through to community partners to be able to do work in the community on our behalf. So any compliance requirements with that funding are passed through to the subrecipient as well in our subrecipient agreement. So three core areas the compliance and subrecipient monitoring consultant supports is from the start of the agreement through closeout of the agreement. So starting with a notice of funding opportunity. So if we're providing awards to a subrecipient in there, prior to that we do a notice of funding opportunity of the award. Then award development, creating the subrecipient agreement in there is the second part of the process. And then also we have compliance requirements on our end for the monitoring of that work in there. So the consultant supports our monitoring of that and then the award closeout at the end.
Okay. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing no objections.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, Juvenile Department, item 1, approval of an amendment to a contract with Latino Network to provide parent engagement, support, and advocacy services. The amendment value is $246,515 and 2 years. Total contract value is increased to $369,768 over 3 years. Funding is through the Oregon Youth Authority. No county general funds are involved. Alice Perry is the Deputy Director of the Juvenile Department. Go ahead, please.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Smith. Good morning, Commissioners. Alice Perry, Assistant Director for the Juvenile Department and currently Acting Director for the department while Christina is out. I'm here this morning because she is out and unable to be here. I'm requesting that you put on the consent agenda the approval of an amendment number 1, to a contract with Latino Network to provide parent engagement, support, and advocacy services to families of Clackamas County juvenile justice involved youth. The amendment value, as Gary said, is $246,515 and 2 years, and the contract value is increased to $369,768 over 3 years. Funding is through the Oregon Youth Authority, JCP Basic funds, which are prevention funds, and no county general funds are involved. We know when parents and guardians are actively involved, youth have better outcomes, their reformation is more successful, and recidivism rates are reduced. Services such as resource navigation, parent coaching in classes, and support understanding the system are part of this, these services. Parent engagement is a key success measure of the department's strategic business plan. Specifically, 80% of parents and guardian report that they feel respected and included in their child's involvement with the juvenile department is our measure. The additional time with this amendment will allow for better analysis of the program's outcomes and will help us determine if service should continue, and if so, we will do a formal procurement process.
Questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing no objections, thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Health, Housing, and Human Services, item 1, approval of a personal services contract with Cascadia Health for peer-delivered supportive housing services. Maximum contract value not to exceed $1,259,304.75 for 39 months. Funding is through Metro Supportive Housing Services Measure Funds. No county general funds are involved. Rod Cook, Director of Health, Housing, Human Services. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. Renaissance Court and Rain Garden are 2 apartment communities with affordable housing development for individuals with severe and persistent mental illness in Wilsonville. This contract includes 2 FTE peer wellness specialists who provide mental health, addiction, and treatment services. They prioritize creating connections and connecting people with options for housing stability and behavioral health services. The program provides trauma-informed, peer-led, recovery-oriented support volunteer services that focus on residents' needs, removing barriers, and connecting with other services.
Commissioner West, you're up.
I'm familiar with these. One's in my neighborhood, within just a few blocks away from where I live. Is this new additional staff that's being brought in to help the demand, or is this existing FTE that needs to be filled or authorized?
I believe this is a new program being added to those particular sites.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing no objections.
Item 2, approval of a personal services contract with Native American Youth and Family Center for Emergency Family Shelter. Contract value not to exceed $1,960,789.81 for 1 year. Funding is through Metro Supportive Housing Services Measure Funds. No county general funds are involved.
As you're aware, there's an overwhelming need in Clackamas County to offer shelter and stability to the most vulnerable populations who are suffering from homelessness, to protect them from the elements and facilitate the transition into permanent housing. NAYA, or the Native American Youth and Family Center, is a nonprofit organization providing culturally specific services. Through this agreement, NAYA will operate a shelter located in Clackamas County that can accommodate a minimum of 8 shelter units and assist 56 families per year. The budget includes expenses for providing support for permanent housing navigation and placement of services, with the goal of moving them into permanent housing.
Questions or comments? Commissioner West.
Is this available to anybody in Clackamas County, or is this specifically for those that are Native American or connected to the tribes?
It's available for anyone. Preference would be giving to Native Americans, but anybody can use these services.
Thank you.
Commissioner Savas.
I believe I know the answer. I've seen these before, but I just want to, for sake of public, point this out. This is not about a weather emergency or anything else. This is about a family, personal emergency. So when they are in an urgent need of something, these services are provided. So
Yes,
to make that
this is
clear.
ongoing, yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing no objections. Go ahead.
Item 3, approval of amendment number 2, extending the duration and increasing the rent amount of a lease agreement with the North Clackamas School District number 12 for WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, service space at the Wichita Community Services Building. The amendment value is $10,900.56 for 12 months ending June 30, 2024. Funding is through the local public health authority funds. No county general funds are involved.
Yes, the WIC program provides numerous health and economic benefits to Clackamas County, including reduced premature births, lower infant mortality, increased prenatal care and breastfeeding rates, improved kindergarten readiness, and increased food intake. This amendment is extending the lease through June 30 of this fiscal year, or this calendar year.
Any questions or comments from commissioners?
Yeah, I have one. Rod, I know this is an important program. How many different sites is this service provided?
I don't know that right offhand. I want to say to you 4 that I can think of right offhand, but there may be more, so I can get that specific number back to you.
Yeah, I know I visited a couple of them. I knew, but was just curious.
Yes, one operates out of this building. We have one at Wichita. I know we have another one in a clinic. So let me check on the exact number.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no objections.
Thank you. Next, Transportation and Development. Item 1, approval of a cooperative agreement with the Oregon Department of Consumer and Business Services for a provision of as-needed building plan review and inspection services. Agreement value not to exceed $50,000 over 5 years. Funding through permitting revenues. No county general funds are involved. Dan Johnson, Director of Transportation and Development. Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much, Chair Smith Commission. Great to be back. I know you missed me. It's been like a minute and a half. We plan for the worst, but hope for the best. And essentially what this agreement before you is essentially a cooperative agreement between ourselves and the state of Oregon. Should an event or issue come up where staffing for our building services department is minimized, it allows us to call upon their services to assist us. If you recall, basically our program is, we are delegated by the state for our building and program to essentially do fire life safety, structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, plan review, and inspection services. It's a 5-year contract. Doesn't have any impact on our staffing levels that we have. We're not looking to reduce staffing, FTE, or temporary, or anything to that in nature. It's just simply there in case of emergencies. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions or comments? Seeing no objections, thank you.
Item 2, approval of an intergovernmental agreement with Marion County for the Scotts Mills Road Butte Creek Bridge Replacement Project. Total agreement value is $4,300,000. Funding is through Marion County and a grant from the Federal Highway Bridge Program. No county general funds are involved.
So there's a bridge, Scotts Mills Bridge, crosses the Butte River between Marion County and Clackamas County. Essentially, the current bridge was built in 1947 and is at the end of its useful life. Marion County has applied and received funding to replace that bridge. Though that bridge crosses from Marion County to Clackamas County, there are some things that Marion County cannot do in Clackamas County. And essentially, this is an IGA between ourselves and Marion County to assist with right-of-way services. Essentially, there's an in-kind donation, which is basically our internal right-of-way staff assisting with that. But essentially, Marion County will reimburse any additional costs. So there will have to be kind of a resolution of necessity that's standard for all capital construction projects that you do. They'll be paying for all the right-of-way costs. If there is condemnation and it goes to some sort of legal proceeding on our behalf, they will be reimbursing any dollars associated with that. So there's no liability or lost revenue in regards to the county. It's a partnership between both these entities to replace the bridge.
Kudos to Marion County for getting a grant to replace a bridge. We've been trying to do that in Clackamas County for years. Any questions or comments?
Just one. So I see this one's got federal assistance, and Dan, the Bull Run Bridge, for example, we have state assistance, I guess, or not? I mean, so my question really is, the core of it is that the state does help on non-state roads for bridges. If I glean that over the years.
Yes.
Okay.
There's a state bridge program that basically looks to collaborate and direct funding throughout the state. It's a very good program based off data associated with any particular bridge. That's what's made us competitive in that with the Bull Run, and they have graciously advanced assistance to help us finance design of that to move it forward, although we're still looking for capital construction dollars associated with it.
Always appreciate getting extra funds where we can to make these infrastructure improvements. So.
Yep.
Seeing no objections, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All of these consent agenda items will be on this Thursday's business meeting for your final action. Next, courthouse construction quarterly update. Nancy Bush, County Operating Officer and our courthouse project manager, will present. And Nancy, if you'll introduce our guest, please.
Yes. Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. So this is our quarterly update of the courthouse. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to recognize a couple of people in the audience. First, we do have Judge Steele here today. And we also have Stephen
Welcome, Judge Steele.
Welcome. We also have Stephen Hadnich here today. He is from WT Partnerships, and he represents the county in this project. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to our presenters. I have Carl Schaefer with me here today. He's the executive manager for the project. And we also have John Kinderchuk, who is the design build manager.
Go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Smith, Commissioners, staff. We're excited to be back with you this morning for another update. As you can see, we've been very busy out there. It's been a little challenging, I think, recently, but things are going well. John is going to walk us through the update, so let's go.
Thank you for the opportunity, County Administrator, Commissioners. I'll run you through the design and construction status, and today I'll give you a little bit of an insight on what's going on in the interiors of the building. So starting with the schedule, we're 17 months into a 36-month schedule, which is approximately 50%. We've finished all of the design, including the conformed set of materials. So right now we're just in the throes of making sure that we're compliant with everything and going through the checks and balances of quality control for our design development documentation. The milestones still preside as weatherproof come April of this year. So by time that we're speaking again, we should have a building that is ready for interior fit-out and millwork. Our occupancy readiness date remains May 1st, and our final completion date remains the end of August 29th. Construction activities completed as of today's date include the enabling early works, the utilities, mass excavation, and of course, concrete structure is complete now. So all the activities that you see out on site include the exterior facade and interior rough-in or fit-out as we move forward. Going forward, you're going to see both the envelope and exterior fit-out for a majority of the spring months until we hit April, May. So all of the activities will be either finishing and testing the facade or building out the interiors with rough-in materials. So today we're going to kick off by sharing the architectural rendering of the exterior facade and then transition into some photographs of the activities on the outside to give you a better idea of what it is that we're doing out there. So here's a southeast perspective. All the blue materials that you see on the building are part of our waterproofing membrane. We commenced testing on those this week, weather providing, of course. And every time we get the blue facade, if you will, up and running, it's closely followed by a window insert and then, of course, sealing of that window. This is the northwest facade. You can see, I should also mention that these photos are from January 10th. We've actually come a long way since then, and we're probably about the 40 percentile mark of completion of the exterior facade. Another photograph of the northeast facade, closer to the front entrance. And of course, the southwest facade where you see the Sally Port and Judges' Chambers in the foreground. Next photo is of our typical window facade getting prepped for testing that will commence this week. This is a photo of a typical laminated timber facade or soffit on the front entrance of the building that's now in place. Photograph of a typical architectural concrete. This is going to be found in the main entrance of the lobby, one of 4. Your typical rough-in of steel staircases. This is one of 4 on the main level that goes up throughout the building. All of our fire protection is now in place for all the various floors, so the piping that you see hanging from the ceiling there is all part of fire suppression system. Mechanical ductwork for balancing the environment is now all going in throughout the building. And we are staging typical fit-out of courtrooms and judges' chambers on floors 3, 4, 5, and 6. So this is a photo of your typical makeup of steel stud rough-in. This is a typical hallway that the public will traverse to gain access to the courtrooms. This is running along the west side of the building with views out to Mount Hood. This is also a typical holding space in the basement where some of our high security areas are. And this is a picture of the service area, interior of the Sally Port for services to come in and out of the building in a designated area. This next picture is the sheriff's garage outside the, or inside of the Sally Port for pickup and drop off. And this is a typical picture of an elevator shaft being prepped out for elevator installation that starts in April. So what's next? Once we start testing the exterior facade, that'll be followed by exterior brick, So in the coming weeks, you'll start to see brick going up. The elevator installs, which I've mentioned, site finishes will actually kick off once we start to dry up a bit here. We'll start finishing the exterior of the building and moving Mount Beaverton back onto the lot. Building waterproofing, of course, the milestone is come April, and interior finishes. As soon as we can control the rain in the building, we'll be ready to go. Thank you very much.
Any other comments? Well, thank you for this wonderful presentation. You said you had some challenges with the weather, is that right?
Well, we had 3 days where we're mitigating ice and rain, all of which didn't stop us, just slowed us down a little bit. But the site is in good shape. We've maintained safe access. We have no safety events that are attached to that scenario. Sure. So we're happy with the outcome. Just a bit of a stall, but nothing that's going to stop us from completing on time.
Well, I think it's amazing that you were able to work through the ice and the snow. Hopefully the workers were protected on the inside, although I can't imagine it being warm whatsoever. You said you were testing the blue membrane for moisture. Is that right? We certainly had our share of moisture in the last week. I don't know how you test those, but...
It's a water test, so once the window is sealed in place, test. Yep, we make sure that it's going to hold up to Oregon weather, essentially.
I noticed in one of your slides you had a courtroom mock-up that was off-site. How did that go?
It went great. It was a massing mock-up. All of our shareholders and user groups were invited to investigate and understand how the various courtrooms would be laid out. The next thing for us to do as a team is to get the actual millwork in place, which will happen post-closeout of the building, and then start to look at wood finishes and the ergonomics of what we're going to put in place. So it'll be a second check.
On the courtroom mock-up, the judges were present?
Yes.
And were any changes made at that time?
Not major changes. We were really sussing out what the final layouts needed to be. So like I said, it's a massing exercise.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, good morning, John and Carl. Thank you for your work, and please pass along to all the workers. We appreciate their resiliency during this bad weather. Question about suppliers. It's been a while since we talked about supplier issues. For the next remainder of this year, do you see any subcontractor or supplier issues on our building?
So far, so good. We are finding that the fallout from COVID is starting to dissipate in the market. All of our long lead items are being tracked specifically to make sure that we're not going to fall into any situation where we can't meet schedule. So nothing to speak of at this point.
I remember last year you commented, one of my questions about concrete suppliers, you mentioned how well our local concrete suppliers were doing, delivering on time and a high quality product. Are you able to, when it comes to all the finishing, when it comes to HVAC, when it comes to what's going to happen on the inside, are you able to find competitive subcontractors locally?
Yes, I can give some facts and figures. So approximately 9% of all of our sub-trades are from the immediate area, meaning our neighbors. We also have a contingency, somewhere around 8% right now, where we're engaging minority businesses of various kinds. They make up probably about $18 million worth of the subcontracted work out there. A lot of our major contracts also have either minority business or local business as tiered subcontractors. So even though we might have big conglomerates that are a part of the project, they also have sub-tiers that are participating in the project. So we're really well positioned that way.
Yeah, and thank you, John. And one other comment, it was the first week of December that we came over and had lunch with you and toured the building.
Indeed, yes.
Well, I I enjoyed talking to a lot of your workers who many of them were minority workers too, hardworking and very, very skilled.
Yeah, we've really done well here. We've got some excellent sub-trades and some very committed trade workers.
Yeah, and in talking to your workers, I was very impressed with how motivated they are and how much they enjoy working on this building. So thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
John, do you know the percentage of union labor versus non-union labor on this project?
Yes, I do. I think it's somewhere in the realm of 85% union, 15% not.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's an opportunity for the non-union labor to be able to bid and work on larger jobs, so they can then
Precisely.
go on and be certified, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a good blend.
Good, thank you very much. Any further questions or comments to our presenters here today? Well, thank you very much. It doesn't seem like a quarter has passed already that we're up, for this update. Time sure goes by fast. I like seeing the progress made on the courthouse. It's going along wonderfully, and thank you very much.
Pleasure to be here. We'll see you in April.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, next on the list, fiscal year 2024-2025 congressionally directed spending exploration list, or another name for earmarks. We have staff, our team from Public and Government Affairs, Tonya Holowetsky, the Interim Director of Public and Government Affairs, and Trent Wilson, Interim Government Affairs Manager. There's a memo in your packet. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. Tonya Holowetsky, Interim Director, PGA, and Trent Wilson, Interim Government Affairs Manager. We're here today to request conditional approval of two proposed projects that, as Administrator Schmidt said, are in your package. To explore for the county's 2024 congressionally directed spending requests. Those two projects are a Safe Place Family Justice Center and the Oak Grove and Gladstone Libraries. The details for each are there, and we're available to answer any questions.
The amounts of money that we're requesting from, let's just take the Safe Place Justice Center. We're asking for $1 million of federal money. What if we only get half of that or a quarter of that?
That's a great question, and so just want to echo that we are early in a process here, and what you're approving today is going to direct us to go do more due diligence. And so that's the type of question.
What if we only get a quarter or a half of it? Would we take that, since this is in addition to a program that already exists? It's not like we're asking for this amount of money to create something new and therefore there's a shortfall. Do you understand my question?
Absolutely. Part of our due diligence process is to determine if that gets lowered, is this still a feasible project? And then the congressional offices are really good in the process of saying like, hey, we're probably not going to be able to get this amount or full amount. Is it still viable if we submit this at a lower request? And we can tell them yes or no at that point.
Okay. I would assume that the Justice Center would take whatever would be available, and then they would scale back their ask accordingly, but I can't really speak for them. Interesting on Oak Grove Libraries, what that request, where did that come from?
So we know that the libraries are a priority for the board, and we're trying to find pots of funding that exist within the CDS process that we know can be competitive. And so when we were looking at the library, what seemed feasible, what is fundable, things that get funded, we saw that, electrification, solar, energy efficiency, these are competitive projects generally within projects. There's not something specific to libraries, but knowing that libraries is a priority, this is a part of the project that we think could be competitive within that.
So this would be addition to what's already been approved for the libraries, solar panels and electric vehicle charging stations.
I don't know the answer to that. I would need the library team to answer that question directly, but I can get back to you.
Okay, yeah, I would like an answer to that, because I don't know. And then you have some other targeted enhancements, as we call them, and we certainly can, $1 million, 2.8. So basically, we have 5 asks.
So in the blue are the asks that we're trying for, at least it's filtered to the top so far, for this 2024 calendar year. In the green is what we submitted last year, And I think the context there is, this is for your awareness, the Congress has not passed a budget from this last year yet. These projects are in the draft appropriations bill. So if Congress were to pass a budget, these green ones would come through. These are projects that are pending if Congress would just, pass a budget. If they don't, congressional offices would come back to us and say like, hey, do you probably want to resubmit this? But for now, they're asking us to assume that good things will happen in DC, to come at them with new projects.
Okay. Gee, I'm not sure who was first, Commissioner Shaw or Savas? Shaw, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. A question on the 500K for the Oak Grove and Glasgow libraries. Can you explain again why those particular libraries came up for this instead of maybe a broader scope of libraries in the county?
It's a good question. When we're looking at projects for congressionally directed spending, we're looking for projects that we know can be delivered in the next year and a half. The feds like to be the last dollar in is a phrase that I use with all of our departments when we're looking at projects. So knowing that these projects are coming due, they're getting, they're in process of being constructed or funded, we know that a project like this could time out well within a this year request. And as far as I was informed from our outreach, the other library projects aren't quite at that level yet. But this is early in the process. We can do more due diligence if you'd like us to explore other library projects. But for these projects now, this is what floated to the top.
I see. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Commissioner Savas.
Just to build on Commissioner Scholl's question, I presume that because they're under construction, that the opportunity is there to do it much cheaper than to retrofit something that exists today, like a library, so providing the electrical service and not having the parking lot even built or paved. And there's a lot of benefits to doing it now. I have no quarrel with these. I'm fine with what's proposed here. But I just want to make mention that when this carbon tax years ago was first laid out for the state of Oregon, that the idea, the hope I had with it, we don't have much control as local governments, but I could tell it was well underway. My hope was that it would really take a lot of those dollars or savings or credits and be applied and spent in the state of Oregon versus being spent in other states for other mitigation. But I couldn't help but note when I was out of state making a visit, saw a brand new park and couldn't help but notice that there were several electric charging stations at the park. And I thought, whoa, that's obviously them living up their initiative. And in Oregon, similar initiative is by 2035, all cars sold will be electric. That we got to prepare for that. So the timing's about right. But I did want to just say that, unrelated, but related from the charging standpoint, that I think the sooner we realize that if we're going to hold true to that, we're going to hold true that all new cars sold by 2035 will be electric, that our apartment buildings and so forth and housing units will have that investment made sooner than later, whether it's federally funded or whether it's state funded, that we adjust that. I do hear a comment that some friends made here over the holidays was, I can't buy an electric car until I can find an apartment where I can actually charge it, because I can't charge it where I work because I'm in the construction trade. So therefore, where do I can't even do that, even though their desire is to do that. So I don't think that our planners and our so forth are being mindful again under the framework of, it's going to be a mandate by 2035. So this is a good start towards that end, and I support it.
Commissioner West.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
It's good to see you both today. Couple thoughts. We're aware that the more ready, the better, right? Like that's essential. We're not just a concept here. We're like, push the go button, go. One thing I don't see, and I don't have a problem with any of these. They're all fantastic. But one thing that I know that has been a priority that is also shovel ready, Trent, we have talked about this, is the respite. For those that, that's almost kind of that transition with people with either addiction and homelessness in a safe, secure place to get stabilized, a stabilization type center. We do not have enough of those in the state. I love a library. We have done a lot for the libraries. We get a lot of money for the libraries. The libraries are in a crisis. The stabilization center helps us address a real crisis. So I'm feeling like with limited money and possible appropriations, if I had to make one adjustment, and I know it's hard to ever say anything about a library, it would be for that stabilization center that I think is on the prioritization level, like it helps save lives. So that's where I would make that critique. I don't know what my colleagues think. My other question is help me understand the appropriations process a little bit. I know they just passed another CR here in January. It goes till March, I believe. But the funding for this is not part of that continuing, as the government's continually funding. Can you help me understand how, or even for those listening, how the appropriation process works? Sorry.
The phrase, "it takes an act of Congress," is one of those beautiful phrases that has like that direct meaning. So they pass a budget. It's usually due, in theory, by the end of September. The federal fiscal year goes from October to September. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But that's where it goes. If they pass a continuing resolution, it's a continuing resolution of the previous budget.
We
right?
need them to actually like do a real, stop kicking the can, Congress.
Correct.
We need you to do something here.
Correct. Okay. Correct. And so what the continuing resolution of this existing budget was actually approved in, December of 2022.
Yeah.
So it's even 2 Congresses ago is the budget that's being passed right now. And if it continues to continue, it includes just the appropriations from 2022, not what was in anything consideration for 2023.
Okay.
So that's what, if it continues on, it doesn't include any new budgetary items. It's just moving over, existing formula funds for departments, administration, and any of these tertiary project appropriation type things are not included.
What do you think about my suggestion for the stabilization center? Would it fit here? What do you think?
My recommendation here is that, or just my encouragement is, we are early in the process, but it's a short process, and we're going to come back to you with the final list. I'm happy to add the facility here, if that's your direction, as a third project to go and explore. We are doing a lot of due diligence on that project already for some stateside work, and so if there's an appetite for this and there's enough due diligence and we think that we can deliver on a type of request, we can go explore that. Congressional directed spending is limited. It's not going to be a big number. It's not going to be more than 5, for example, 5 or 10 million. But as you said, every little bit counts. And if we can target like what we're specifically asking for and what it will do, and if it can pass the political muster and the project muster, then we can come back to you with a recommendation to finalize it or not.
It's my understanding that $500,000 or even $1 million or even in that range would go a long ways in the stabilization center. That would be an impactful amount of money for that project.
We can work with the team to figure out what the need is and come back to you with that.
Are you talking about a respite center
That we're working on?
inside the stabilization center?
Yeah, it's
I've heard 2 different things.
It's kind of a 23-hour hold. We can only keep you for 23 hours for a number of things, but then there's another piece of it where there's more of a respite, a little bit longer stay attached to it also. So it's kind of a 2-pronged approach, a little bit in the same building is my understanding.
Who's the respite for?
People that are homeless, people that may be like needing, there may be some level of other intersectionality with addiction or mental health issues or whatnot, but it allows somebody to get off the streets, to not have not to have a direct penalization through law enforcement, something that's more treatment oriented. You can jump anytime, Trent, about what
I mean, you're describing the project well.
Yeah.
It's this dual building that provides diversion for folks who are navigating addictions, and then if they need to stay longer beyond the 23 hours, they can stay at the respite care.
And we've talked about how this is really close to shovel ready. There has been some state funding. It's relatively affordable, big impact, very evidence-based, a lot of data, a lot of modeling that shows that this program works to help divert people away from law enforcement, more towards treatment. I find it to be quite positive and low-hanging fruit to get something impactful done, part of the care continuum we keep talking about. That's why I brought it up for this. Maybe, I know that like the sheriff's office and maybe the DA, like 500, I mean, it's not gonna be wildly expensive to get up and running, but it's a really big bang for the buck to deal with it.
Thank you. Gary?
Dan Johnson can answer your question on the libraries, if he could come forward quickly, if that's okay.
Dan, would you please come forward, please? Thank you.
We can't get enough of you, Dan.
Maybe you could take Tanya's seat and Trent would stay or whatever.
Trent, why don't you stay here? Good idea.
Thank you.
Just real quick, in the interest of saving time, so Trent doesn't have to send you an email later, a couple of answers. You know, these earmarks, it's the right fit and the right feel. And so, I mean, that goes around like how big is the ask, what they ask for, you know, what's interesting for these folks who are identifying these earmarks. We got approached by our partners at PGA to look at this. We brought forward the idea about the libraries, not brought forward, built on it. Actually, Administrator Schmidt was talking about it as well, about what it could be and what it could be used for. We're proactively thinking about net zero for those buildings, so there's like some minor pre-work going on, like conduit and things like that. And we're also looking for funding in other avenues as well, not general fund, but other avenues that might meet these needs. But essentially that $500,000 would allow us to bring both the Gladstone Library and the Oak Lodge Library to basically a net zero, and net zero would mean solar panels and would also mean some charging stations up there on the site as well. And you talk about why the timing. The timing is important because it's when, as Trent so eloquently said, it's kind of last dollar in, when's it going to be delivered? Those are all things we look at. And to build on the chair's concern about, do we really take it? I mean, that's a very good question. The question is, what are the strings attached to it? You know, because we talked about like transportation money in the past, but large transportation, we kind of shy away from a lot of federal money because it's got to be a really important project because there's strings attached. We won't know that more until PGA does their great work.
So when you bring the department, PGA, thank you, Dan, for that. When you bring projects to the board on these earmarks, so to speak, is it based on what you think is available in Congress? And then you try to see what's in the congressional bucket and then try to pair it with something in Clackamas County? Because I would have never thought that our libraries needed charging stations and solar panels. That would not be my second priority on this list ever, especially when we're talking about what Commissioner West was talking about, a respite center. But maybe there's not money available in Congress for that. Can you help me understand how this works?
Yes, there's a lot of factors that go into it. Some of it is just, and I don't try to like oversimplify it, but some of it's readiness, some of it's prioritization. You know, for the project like the respite centers, we've been working with H3S on presenting a state request. And so we've put a lot of energy into that to try to get state funds here in 2024, for example, right, in 2024. So if we can get funding here in February, let's say, for the state legislature, then money that's going to come in 2025 might not be as relevant for the 23-hour center than something else. So that's like just off the cuff, a first question I'm going to have about the respite center is like, is 2025, the summer of 2025, soon enough to provide meaningful dollars, or are we just reimbursing a project that we'll have built by then? So that'll be a type of question I ask for a project like that. There's political calculus with the delegation offices. They have their priorities. There's certain buckets within both chambers, like the Senate and the House, and like what they fund. For example, the House doesn't fund health, housing, and human services type projects, or they didn't this last year, whereas the Senate does, and they over-prioritize some of those pieces. And so they balance each other, and some of those pieces are part of the calculus, in short.
Gary?
I'd like to answer that question because I directed PGA how to do this. So I used to work for the U.S. Senate, as you may recall, Commissioners. U.S. Senator Mark Hatfield, who was chairman of the Appropriations Committee. Yep. I worked for him at that time. So the first question for our staff is, what is the funding available and what are the restrictions? And second, what are the board's priorities that matches those funding restrictions? I told the staff all of these should be focused on board priorities. And so libraries is still one of your priorities, and it saves money. It saves our money by requesting this request. That's why it's here. Thank you.
Thank you. That's what I want to know. This is news to me. Commissioner Savas and then Commissioner West.
Yeah, in my education, we're always learning in the roles that we have, is that these grants are always nuanced, and I think that the piece that you touched on, which is relevant here, in this case as far as libraries, is the feds on this particular grant are last in, right? They want to see that investment so forth underway and the funding for it underway. So it could be that if we are much closer to a facility for what Commissioner West has raised, those opportunities may present themselves at that particular point in time, right? So there's a timing issue as well. So,
you bet. Commissioner West?
Not to oversimplify it, I just literally think net zero in Oak Grove, Gladstone Libraries does zero to actually do any meaningful environmental work. It may be virtue signals that were super green over here, but I don't see how $500,000 for 2 charging stations probably and some solar panels is a good use of any taxpayer dollars for a small library in that part of in a small state. I just don't see it, but I do see an immense need wherever we can get the money to deal with homelessness, addiction, crisis, and building out our care continuum. I know that there is some effort to focus on that in Congress also, so maybe that will help us with appropriations. But I really don't care about how many solar panels that library has. I just don't. I just can't prioritize that over maybe other opportunities to get whatever money we can have to deal with the biggest crisis that we face here locally. Nothing against solar panels. People want to do that choice on their own home or maybe on some bigger project, but Oregon's a pretty green state, and it really doesn't have an impact in the overall climate issues that we talk about. And I don't think Little Clackamas County libraries do either. I think we can be pragmatic and smart, still be efficient and green in ways that are cost effective. I don't see it here. That's just my opinion. I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Gary, what is our action on this today?
So I'd like you to take a vote, please, to either affirm these 2 requests, ask for more information, add the stabilization as a third, just direction to staff on next steps.
Okay, so you want action taken on the requests highlighted in blue.
Blue, yes.
What about the requests, 3 requests highlighted in green?
So I suggest we wait to see if Congress actually passes a budget or not, and if not, then we'll come back on those.
Thank you for returning, Tanya.
You bet.
Chair,
Yes.
I move to approve the 2 funding opportunities and also direct staff to look in and explore funding for respite recovery investments.
I'll second for the sake of discussion.
Commissioner Savas has moved the congressional directed spending include a Safe Place Family Justice Center and Oak Grove and Gladstone Libraries, and look into funding for a respite center, and Commissioner West has seconded that motion. Further discussion? Yes, go ahead.
Chair, thank you. I think that we can be much more creative than an Oak Grove Library net zero funding from the federal government. I don't want to vote for any motion that includes this currently. I'm not there. I do want us to dig in. Maybe it's a respite center. It's something that gets us funding for the care continuum that must be funded, not just in Clackamas County, but throughout the state, that helps people with this, this ongoing priority. That's a bigger board priority than solar panels on a library. So if this motion goes forward as it was stated, I will vote no because I want us to be laser focused on the priority and not on the net zeros for the Oak Grove Library.
Thank you. Does anyone know if these solar panels and charging stations for electric cars were installed, Dan, would it help our climate action plan credits? I think that's how we need to be possibly looking at this. Does anybody in the room know that answer? Sorry to put you all on the spot, but
Yeah, no problem. Again, for the record, Dan Johnson, Director DTD. It helps with, we have I think it's a 1.5% set aside for efficiency on some of these projects when they're government projects. And it helps meet that. I'm not saying that we aren't already there. I'd have to go back and research that. We may have things already in place that meet that objective. And so that would be the question I would have. Do they meet our specific? We don't have a climate action plan adopted or acknowledged by the Board of County Commissioners, but these steps would theoretically move us towards, again, that objective of theoretically net zero for the buildings.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, if I interpreted an earlier response by the administrator, I think I interpreted or heard, correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, I don't want to put words in your mouth at all, but that this could ultimately result in a long-term cost savings, especially from the powerization, and energy's not getting any cheaper, and I encourage people to start looking at their electric bill here pretty soon when that 17% is implemented and the year following is implemented. So it's, you know, in hindsight, we looked at a number of projects that we could have done when they were available or cheaper. We could have done them at a savings, and I see this as a savings opportunity. We'd be in a much better place. So if I see an opportunity here not only to save a little bit of energy and general fund contributions, but also capital expenditures in the future when these will be required at a far higher expense. So the last thing I want to say is that sometimes the larger the ask disqualifies us from getting anything whatsoever, and these small little ones are much easier to get across the finish line than much bigger asks. So there's a practicality that if you ask too much, you lose it all.
Thank you. Commissioner Scholl.
Yes. Tanya and Trent, if we vote yes on Commissioner Savas's motion, that will not preclude you from looking at the potential for adding a respite center onto this look-see that you're going to come back with in February. Is that correct?
Correct. This is only exploratory. This directs us to do due diligence on what's on this paper to come back to you later with the final list.
And between now and the time you come back in February with request for final approval of your recommended list, commissioners could communicate with you and the county administrator on other ideas. Is that correct?
Look to Gary's feedback here. I mean, we're looking for your direction, right? And so if these are the three, I would like to stick to the three, right? If we're looking into the respite center, for example, and something's close to the continuum of care is the phrase you've used here, or adjacent, I would want to come back to you and just get that blessing to make sure that we're on the right path.
So yes, if you have ideas, we'll hear it, but again, a lot of staff spend a lot of time to look at what's available. It's one-time funding, by the way. The federal funding is one time. It's not programmatic support that goes on and on and on. So if you have other ideas, yes, let us know.
Okay, Commissioner West?
Thank you.
Sorry, Paul.
No, yeah, thank you, Chair. So it's $500,000 for net zero library upgrades. I know it's not totally a fair comparison because I guess it's federal tax dollars, but that's a really big ROI on energy savings. I guess we see that savings, maybe we feel it more immediate on the local level in the county, but we still, to get that local feeling, we still spent $500,000 of taxpayer money. So principally, even though some of that money is coming from all over the nation, there's a principled thing for me here about the cost and the prioritization. I'm still a no vote. I don't want to prioritize this. I just principally only want to be firm on addressing the core critical issues that we have to face. I just got done having yesterday an insanely long but meaningful meeting dealing with Measure 110, and we'll talk about it later. That's where my priority is. I'm going to just let my colleagues know that I respect you. I don't know what your thoughts are on ROI, Commissioner's Office. I'm going to be a no.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, there is a motion on the table. Are we clear on the motion, Commissioners? Gary, are you clear on the motion?
Yes.
Okay, Tony, please take the poll.
Commissioner Scholl.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
No.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 3-1. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gary, what's next?
Okay, thank you. Next is, I lost my list. It is the approval of proposed bylaws for the Clarks Highland Community Planning Organization, or CPO. Tonya will present this as well.
Yes, thank you. Now I'm here on behalf of our community engagement program and asking the board to approve the proposed bylaws for Clarks Highland Community Planning Organization. As you see in the packet in my memorandum, that the last time they were approved was March 2007. They used a current bylaw sample that we provided to all CPOs and updated their bylaws accordingly. Two key changes that are of note is that they merged two officer positions into one, Secretary Treasurer, and they moved from an annual election of officers to every 2 years, starting in this year. So those are really the main changes outside of updating to reflect the new bylaws.
Okay. Commissioners, is there any discussion on this?
Chair, I'm fine with this, but I do have a question for Tanya, and that is, what I've noticed since COVID, we've lost a lot of our, not all, but we've lost a lot of volunteers, members of sit on our advisory committees, whether they're CPOs or other committees. And what I've noticed is that some of them are not as experienced in decorum and treating people fairly and how to processes and so forth. And I'm seeing a kind of a growing need for maybe some orientation, education that is, positive, of course, but, for whether new members or whatnot, I don't know if there's a, when we get staffed, but is there any kind of thoughts or plans towards that end? Maybe we could do something here, right, and bring a number of people together and do it at a saving, so to speak. But I see a need out there right now for that.
Commissioner Salvas, I agree. I stepped into the community engagement program in September, very new to it, and have been learning quite a bit. I've been in communication with quite a few community members, whether it's Hamlet, CPOs. I've been working with CCI, and I agree. I think there's a lot we can do, and that is really one of my biggest priorities. As you know, I was the lead for the communications team, and now I'm able to turn my attention to our legacy programs. I'm calling them our legacy programs, and really shore them up. And so we are going to be putting a lot, you'll be seeing a lot of, I hope, good improvements over the next year. As I said to one member, I hope they'll come back next year and say we've done a good job.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's encouraging. I just want to just express to my colleagues that something that Clackamas County, I think, is a leader in. If you look at our public engagement and our volunteer base and everything that we've done, I think we have a lot to be proud of. And I knew that when Gary was a PGA director, I do know that he took a lot of pride in that and acknowledged that. So I'll be mindful, I want to just be mindful that all of our volunteers out there, they spend all that time and hours that, we appreciate them and we appreciate the work, and I appreciate that we're continuing to support them as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we need a motion?
Seek a motion to approve the
I'll
updated
accept the
bylaws.
So moved.
Second?
Sorry, Mark. No problem. I'm sure you had it well worded.
Commissioner Savas has moved we approve the new bylaws for the Clarks Highland Community Planning Organization. And who was our second?
Me.
Commissioner West, second the motion. Further discussion? Seeing none, Tony, please take the poll.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Commissioner Schull.
Aye.
Commissioner Zavas.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye. Motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next is the county's general fund 30-year budget forecast review. I wanted to give a chance for you commissioners and the public to have an update on where we're at with the county's budget as far as looking forward. 30 years, our fantastic finance staff have done that. Elizabeth Comfort, Finance Director, Sandra Montoya, Budget Manager. There is a memo in your packet and the chart in your packet. Please go ahead, Elizabeth.
Thank you again. Good morning, Commissioners, Chair and Commissioners. We're going to present to you just a high-level overview of the 30-year forecast. As I said in the staff report, we update this several times a year. It is a living document, and right now what you'll see is 2 years actuals that lead into our forecasted 30-year. And I have our budget manager, Sandra Montoya, here that is going to walk us through some changes that have occurred specifically from the last review that we brought to the Budget Committee in May of '23. I want to do a shout out, though. We do have Wendy Ryder, who is our new Budget Committee member on Zoom with us, so she is joining via Zoom. And then we also had James Karn here, but he had to just leave moments ago to an appointment. But so we do have invested Budget Committee members that are participating via virtually too today.
Okay, well, good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Sandra Montoya, Budget Manager. As Elizabeth said, we presented the forecast to you the last time in May of '23 during the Budget Committee meeting, and since that time, it has been updated with the fiscal year 22-23 ending balances. I would just want to remind you, I know that you know this, but just for the public that is listening, the forecast is a living document. So it gets updated multiple times throughout the year as information becomes known. And what we've done is we have extended it beyond the typical 5-year forecast. So most organizations just go out 5 years, but because we have the commitment of the courthouse construction, we have gone out through fiscal year 55-56 to make sure that for the next 30 years, we have sufficient funding available to make that $15 million a year payment. And so that is what you have before you. You also have in this document a bunch of years in between that are collapsed. So if you ever wanted to see that, we would just expand the Excel spreadsheet and you would be able to see the detail that is in that. But for the presentation purposes, we have collapsed starting in fiscal year 28-29, and then we again show you fiscal year 52-53. So just, again, wanting to share that. Also wanted to point out that because it is a living document, it is difficult to compare version by version. So we want you to know if you ever have any questions about changes, what we try and do is put them into the assumptions table that you have below the spreadsheet. And bless you, Tony. So just want to let you know if you ever have any questions about, well, what changed the number from one period to the next? Please look to the assumptions or ask, because we always have a legitimate reason for the changes, but most of the time it's just as time evolves and information is known, the numbers are updated and they do change the bottom line total. Some items that we monitor continually, the beginning fund balance, that is the carry forward balance from one year to the next. The top section is a revenue, and we do it as in summary by category, so you'll see it as operating revenue. Operating revenue just means it's current year revenue. Then we have operating expenses is the next section, and the difference between those, you see them on your spreadsheet as net operating income. The difference between operating revenue and operating expenses is what we look to for a sustainable budget. You hear us making that or stating that terminology often. When revenue exceeds expenses in the current year, we call that a sustainable budget. The difference between those two gets put into our contingency, our reserves, and our unappropriated ending balance that we save for the future, so for future projects. And so those are numbers that we continually monitor, and the goal is for us to keep a positive net income number. If it ever went the other way, we would know that we have a problem, at least in the short term. In the longer term, it's less of a problem, because the further out we go, the less we know, less certainty, I guess would be a good way of putting it. But the closer term, we want to nail that and have that be a positive number so that the organization is in healthy condition. So now we're moving on from that net operating income. Below the net operating income is all of the special projects. That is where we start to look at variations, and where in the longer term, we would say the organization needs to pick and choose. You as the leaders need to pick and choose the priorities and where that money is going to be assigned. And we start to tell you, yes, you have money for this project, or we may not have enough. Similarly, last year, that was the dilemma. As we looked out into the future, we were seeing negative numbers out into the future, which caused us to have to strategically make reductions in the county's budget. So again, this document, what we're seeing now is This current version, we have a balanced, sustainable budget for that 30-year period. We've highlighted in fiscal year 55-56 that unappropriated fund balance of $17.6 million. That would tell you that for the duration of this period, we have a sustainable operating budget. We have built in the capital projects that are known at this time, the special projects that are known at this time. That's really important for us to highlight. Anything, and I'll say it this way, it may be part of your discussion, but if it's not known, like if you don't have a value that we can plug in, and it's not something that you have approved, it's not in this document. So if there are discussions, and that's well and good, because you have to do that in order for the organization to operate. But until they're known and you've approved them, they are not in this document, so they haven't been plugged into the future. Let me see, I'm going to look at my notes. Give me 1 second. Okay. So fund balance, contingency reserves, and unappropriated ending balance that you see. So that's the last 3 rows on this spreadsheet. Our goal is to maintain contingency and reserves at policy level. So that would be 5% for contingency, 10% for reserves. And then that unappropriated ending balance, that is what we are using to balance those special projects. So throughout this forecast, you will see the goal is that we aren't dipping into contingency and reserves, that those are being maintained for emergencies, for unforeseen emergencies, and it really is only unappropriated ending balance that we are using for those special projects. The other thing that I'll call out is that while 17 million seems like a big number today, it doesn't take much for an expense put in now to be escalated, meaning it over time, that index, that CPI index affects it and would turn it from a positive to a negative. Not much at all. So if you can envision a snowball at the top of a hill, with time being that snowball rolling, it's going to continue to grow and get bigger and faster. That's that exponential growth of expenditures that happens over time. So again, something very small, a change now, could wipe that 17 million out in pretty quick order.
And I think this would be a good time also then to share, like that is an ongoing expense, and it has a different impact to our 30 or 40, one time or versus an ongoing. So what Sandra just described as that snowball is an ongoing expense. But we also have, how does a one-time expense impact the forecast is differently. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so one-time expenses don't have nearly the impact in the forecast that an ongoing expense. An ongoing expense would be escalating over time. It would repeat. So basically, if I could do wages, a wage increase today is going to exponentially grow every single year. That has a much bigger impact in the forecast than if you did a $1 million one-time project today. We're talking apples and I don't even know, watermelons, it's huge.
Well, for example, we were talking about libraries in the previous discussion, so we do have some library costs in here in the capital projects section. Those are one-time versus like salary increases, adding staff, those have an ongoing impact to our forecast. I know you have some other things. I want to make sure we talk about the difference between last May and today in the columns. So we have updated our actuals that were for, it's the second column in, those we have dated the actuals for June 30 for our last fiscal year. The year is still in the process of being audited, but we have pretty solid numbers that we can put in there for known revenues and known expenditures for last fiscal year. And then the third column is our current year. So we're always updating that column for actuals. So we know how much we've received in property taxes so far. It has already exceeded our budget. So we're able to update those. So as well as putting the budget in the current year column, anything known, because this is a living document, we want to put everything we know today in that column as well. So if any expenditures have exceeded our expectancy, we want to add those in there, or any new revenue or revenue that's exceeded the budget.
I think we've highlighted the items that we purposed to highlight for you today. I want to make sure that we leave enough time for your questions. So
Yes,
please.
and we have some questions. So I think you explained it, but in your net operating loss columns, on the actuals for 22-23, or 9.6 million, we go for budgeted actuals. It's an increase of almost 10 million. So explain that disparity again.
So you see those revenues that we're carrying over are going to be used in capital projects in the section below. So we intentionally have that net operating income, so we can use those dollars for
I see.
The other, like the library, the health clinic, and other courthouse expenditures.
And regarding the end fund balance, you know, it appears to be quite healthy, but we have set aside contingencies and reserves. And probably our biggest snowball effect on our budget is our 2,500 employees.
Correct.
And those, correct me if I'm wrong, are the single largest inflationary cost. And so we've had these discussions because seems like we're in constant negotiations. I'm concerned that the people on the other side of negotiations look at our end fund balance and think, oh, commissioners are sitting on a lot of money, okay? But those roll-up costs over time, I'm hoping people are smart enough to do what the math is. When you add the 4.5 COLA interest year, it's added on year, on year, on year, and that is an inflationary hit to our budget. We have a 4.5 inflationary pressure on our budget for probably the largest portion of our budget, correct, Gary?
Yes, correct.
And do you foresee the 4.5 COLA decreasing?
Actually, the CPI just came in for this upcoming fiscal year. It's 4.1%.
Okay.
So it'll be slightly lower.
So, you know, commissioners, we really need to be mindful of that as we move forward, and I'm often saying that. I'm a broken record. So you can see the evidence here, and you hear it from our budget people, how important that snowball effect is. And Montoya said, it's not even apples and oranges, it's apples and a big watermelon hitting you in the face. So just please be mindful. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, I do appreciate you having the fiscal year 21-22 and 23-23 in there as well to get that, so I can see the trend. So thank you for including that. And I definitely acknowledge that your budgeting here was showing actuals. So first question is, do we have a rough number of what our, I'm going to use an example where I'm going to go with this. We have a rough number of our vacancies right now?
Yes.
What's that rough number in vacancies?
Help me, Elizabeth, please. Sandra, it's
We just put that report out.
I'm going to pull it up.
we're budgeting for 4%, but it's higher.
Okay.
Really, it's higher. All right. Well,
so while they're doing that, I'll just carry over my next one here. I would love to see, especially for the districts that rely on the property tax base versus a rate base. So like West would be the exception, but I still think it's responsible for us to see the forecast like this for all the hats we wear, districts we wear, especially again those that are on the property tax. Rely upon that solely for the most part. NCPRD, the library district, so on. So where I'm going with this is that if all the vacancies were filled, you know, looking at it from whatever term you want to use, you know, the fully funded or fully appropriate, I don't know what the word is, but if there was another budget structured like this that was not actuals, that actually included all the anticipated staffing and everything else, the best day, what would that look like as well? I think that kind of gives us a balance of, you know, budgeting for the actuals, which I understand. That's I won't say it's conservative, you know, but if we don't see the full picture, like what if we did staff fully and got to that point? So that vacancy rate or number, that's a snowball, if you will, and you know, ongoing. But we're never fully staffed, so that's a reality, right? So we know that, but I would love to know what our trending is on that vacancy rate, that vacancy number, as we go, whether it's a percentage or a number, and see how we're hitting that. And you know, what comes to mind recently, of course, is you know, the sheriff's levy that was passed that had the increase for new positions above and beyond the prior to that. So, you know, when those are filled, that's going to be an expense that'll add to that. And so I just want to better understand that. And that's all I have.
All right.
And we have the answer.
Okay.
It's 11% vacancy as of 10 days ago, I believe.
As of what?
10 days ago.
So it's been as low as 4%, and now it's 11%?
We budget around 4%.
Okay.
Because we know it fluctuates throughout the year, but today we're at 11% vacancy.
So I'd love to see the size of that 7% delta in a snowball analogy, what that would look like, essentially.
And if I can clarify, sorry, Elizabeth, is we forecast 4%. So the
yes.
budget is what we ask the departments to put in, but departments will vary. So if you recall, that was part of the conflict last year, was that departments, not all of the departments do that. That is the recommendation, is that the shortfall in the budgets be filled with a vacancy factor, because that is not common throughout Oregon and actually throughout municipalities. The common is to budget personnel at 100%, which has always been the delta of this. That's why the personnel budget always seems like it's so much higher than the actuals. And it's because we are taught, we're trained to budget 100% filled, but the reality is something much less. Mm-hmm. So in the forecast, we forecast 4% vacancy.
Yep. Thanks for your great work. I really appreciate this, and I'd be remiss if I didn't at least address the issue here. It was just a couple months ago, we were talking about a $5 million in cuts, and I think there was a couple of assumptions that were clarified or fixed. That was great. That reduced that, and also doing the actuals, which also shows the other side of it. But again, I would like to get a sense of what that snowball would look like in the vacancy rate. If we just got back to a 4% number, which was a reality, versus fully filled, which is not a reality.
We do have a number for that. So right now, and we've put this out, as we said during the Budget Committee meetings, with our improved reporting, we are able to provide more communication, more data to the departments. And so one of the things that we recently put out, I think in the last few days, was the vacancy report that said, here's the vacancies that you have by department, and here is the savings that you could garner by just putting in a vacancy factor of either 3 months or 6 months in the budget, and the departments can determine how quickly are we filling these positions. For some, 3 months may be a really good range. For others, like the larger departments, it may take 6 months to fill these positions because there's several vacancies that they have. So we have that for the general fund. If they assumed 3 months vacant, they would have, if they assume 6 months, they would have $7.1 million in the general fund alone. So that would take quite a bit, I would imagine, to have 6 months of vacancies across 93 positions. I don't know, but we're giving them estimates so that they can put those in their budgets.
Yep. If you could send me that data or send us all that data, that'd be great in a separate spreadsheet. That'd be nice. Thank you.
Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, Ms. Montoya, Director Comfort. On your forecast out to 2055, on the operating revenue the line that says federal, state, local, and all other gifts and donations. Last year, we know the actual was $23,580,000, and you got it projected all the way out to the year, fiscal year 55, 56 at $56 million. My question is, when it comes to projecting that line, federal, state, local, and all other gifts and donations, we know that the federal government and the state government can only budget out a couple years. So your forecast is based on an assumption that the kind of funds we received last year and the year before are going to be perpetuated by the federal and state government. Now, when we look out 30 years, you know, we're looking at operating revenues $500 million, operating expenses just a little bit less. But when we go out all the way to 2055, we see the operating revenues at forecasted at $1,193,000,000 and operating expenses at $1,175,000,000. So for that year, 55, 56, a net operating income of $18 million. That's $18 million is a small piece of $1,175,000,000. Well, my question is this, again, is when we project based on previous years' incomes from this line, federal, state, local, and all other gifts and donations, how can we reasonably forecast with some sort of certainty that we'll be seeing those kind of dollars coming in the future? Especially when we look at the potential for the federal budget in the next few years, perhaps, to be restricted due to a huge budget deficit and national debt.
I think there's a couple of answers to your good questions. First, I would like to highlight that very right column is the first year we do not have our courthouse payment. So that is the first year that reflects the completion of our 30-year commitment. So I just want to highlight that. So we do have the revenues and the expenditures. So when we forecast receiving those federal dollars, we talked about the subrecipient contract that you moved to consent, thank you very much. Those dollars then are equally being expensed. So if those dollars are not going to come in, then they won't go out the door. So those dollars would either decrease, increase, or be omitted. So they're balanced, because right now we're projecting those revenues dollars to come in from the federal grants, and we're also budgeting those to go out the door for those programs as well. So they're tied.
Okay.
So we won't, so if we lose the revenue, we also have to give up our expenses.
I see. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments regarding this budget briefing for us today? Well, thank you for your hard work on it. This is a very good document. I'm sure we can refer to it later as needed. Thank you for coming today. Gary, what's next?
Thank you, Commissioners. Because Commissioner Schrader was not able to be here today, I'm going to propose the next two items be bumped until all 5 commissioners are present. That is the board committee assignments and discussing your board evening business meeting schedule. Is that okay with you, Commissioners, to hold on that? Okay.
Yes.
Last item is Commissioner communications, but we're also up at the time for the policy session. Chair, how would you like to proceed?
Policy session on?
Next? Go right to the policy session?
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to jump to the policy session, which is Measure 110 Values Statement. This is a request by the board to come back to you with a draft document which would state the values of the board on Measure 110. Kimberly DeSantis, Senior Policy Advisor in the Board of County Commissioners Office, will be the presenter. She's helped work with multiple staff to come up with the draft, so we're seeking your feedback today. Go ahead, please, Kimberly.
Thank you, Gary, for the introduction. Good morning, Commissioners and Chair. Nice to be before you this morning. So as some background, in November of 2020, there was a Drug Addiction Treatment and Recovery Act that was passed by voters, more commonly known as Measure 110. You've discussed it a lot. It decriminalized personal amounts of controlled substances and shifted some funding towards addiction treatment services. Last year, the board took the opportunity to raise some questions about the effectiveness of Measure 110. This was about June of last year. And you began conversations about some necessary changes. You have not met formally to discuss your position since June of last year, and there has been growing interest across the state to either reform or repeal Measure 110. And this last December, you asked for an opportunity to come together and to discuss your position and to consider something in writing. So before you today, you have a draft values statement that you can utilize, you can modify, you can throw it out and start all over again. It is up to you. The DA was unable to be here today, but we do have representatives from Health, Housing, and Human Services. I believe Mary Rumbaugh is here behind me, and she's available for questions. And with that, I will kick it off to you.
Commissioner West.
You knew I was going to flip my light on, didn't you, Chair? Before I even got there. Thank you, Chair. I'll do my best not to be long-winded. I have a lot of thoughts about this. Just had a very, very productive meeting in Salem all afternoon and most of the day with the majority leader in the Senate, Senator Lieber, who I want to be very clear, I have much respect for. We are not coming fully eye to eye yet on what this legislature might do, but I want to be very clear that I respect Senator Lieber and enjoy the continuing conversation and being included in that conversation with her as we try to fix this policy. I think it's super important, since we discuss it all the time, that we're very clear in our value statement as a board. One of the big questions is, do we support a full repeal, or do we want to do this significant amendment restructuring of Measure 110? Before I get into all these things specifically about the value statement, I am conflicted. I feel like I waffle, maybe like a lot of Oregonians, with the position we've been put in. I'm just being honest about where I'm at. One, the legislature always had marijuana dollars. It always had alcohol tax dollars and cigarette dollars. It always could have been more purposeful in its effort to address mental health and addiction issues in the state of Oregon. It always could have made it a priority. It chose not to. Measure 110 changed that, and it did change funding sources and then also decriminalized. But the problem I have also with Measure 110 is the premise is that it's a pro-drug measure. In its fundamental core, it's pro-drug. It's easy to get high, and it's still hard to get treatment. That's something in its core that is strong for we just need to repeal and ask the legislature to not abdicate its role. It has more pressure now more than ever. Let's be more effective with rolling out the funding that's always been there. Then we have to trust a legislature that's never shown itself to truly step up and show real leadership in this case and address this crisis. And there's not a lot of confidence, especially from the counties, the League of Oregon Cities, the Sheriff's Association, the DA's Association, a lot of local governments, that even in the short session with the polling the way it is and the outcry from our communities, it just is going to be the appearance of something significant without actually really being significant and rising to the occasion to show the type of leadership we need in a bipartisan way to get it done. So here we are at the question, what's our value statement? And as a county and a leading county and a leading voice in this, are we a full repeal? And then let's get the funding out and let's be recovery oriented in all the things we're doing? Or are we like the Max Williams crew with a potential ballot measure looming that we're all going to be addressing, and more of a, we don't trust the legislature, we need to actually do a full kind of restructure and keep some funding elements in place, but a very significant restructure, I think, is the big question before us. I don't know how you want to handle this, Chair, but I have a lot of thoughts about this document.
Okay.
I can jump into my thoughts, or
yes.
I know it's.
Go ahead, and I have some thoughts too, and maybe the other commissioners do too. Commissioner West, go ahead.
This is a really good start, I feel like. Ms. Rumble, I very much value your opinion here on a local perspective. I'm sure you'll be up here in a minute. I really, really want to hear your thoughts on this. I want this to be a value statement, which means it can be kind of broad, but I want it from a county's perspective, right? And that's a little unique than a legislator or even the city of Portland, but I think that's kind of my focus. Couple things that I don't see here is, and I think Clackamas County wants to speak to culture around this too. That's like, there's some, in the last few bullet points, it's there. So a couple things I don't see is that I feel like Measure 110 almost encouraged and was very permissive with drug culture in Oregon, which I think we're much more permissive and encouraging of drug usage in Oregon than many places. So I think that we need to very much be clear that we don't want a permissive drug culture in Clackamas County. I think we need to be clear about the data we're getting from OHA and the data. It's not about your programs and whether or not using harm reduction, fine. I want us to talk about sobriety. I want to know the data on someone through the care continuum and their journey in sobriety and who's sober. All of the state's goals never talk about sobriety, wholeness, the healing within sobriety. The goal is sobriety. And in Oregon, that's kind of a radical statement because the legislature will not make that statement. It is about sobriety, and we need to make that same, we need data that aligns with a vision of prevention, long-term recovery, and sobriety. There's no real benefit to us to just talk about provided services, but how are people getting sober? And being clear that that's our goal, and we need the data to do that. We are far away from having the type of accountability tools that we need to intervene to get people care. Right now, it looks like the legislative concept from Senator Lieber is they're really pushing a Class C misdemeanor that only gives us 30 days to barely sober somebody up, maybe if they're on fentanyl, if we're being honest about what that intensive treatment looks like, to where we could use the accountability piece of a Class A misdemeanor, which is what the sheriffs, what the DAs, what the League of Oregon Cities, and now it looks like AOC, where we want to have a Class A misdemeanor because it gives us 364 days of potential accountability, with the whole goal is to dismiss that charge, but the goal is to intervene to help people get sober and healed. And we're very far away from what the legislator is willing to move on because of some ideological and politics, but we really need and are begging for bigger accountability. So I think that we should be specific about that within this document. And Measure 110 really did something horrible with kids. Kids aren't adults. And that population should not be treated the same. And it is because of Measure 110. And that's wrong. And I feel like that we should also address that specifically, and that's not in this document. And then one other thing that I'll bring up as that's specific to counties, Measure 110 completely changed the funding, and it did impact local counties and whatnot. So here's Measure 110 cuts services to drug abuse prevention, alcoholism services, programs in cities and counties, and funding for schools and state police by an estimated statewide of $265 million in the recent budget cycle. I think that we should recommend, and our value should be that to identify these expenditures that funded treatment prior to Measure 110 and restore that back to the local level. There's talk right now that the legislature wants to take, as we are the local health authority, it is our role as the government closest to the people. They want to take funding away and some of our flexibility on the local level to manage that funding and give it back to the state who's further away from the people and allows us to be less nimble and specific and tailored to our population. And Measure 110, we can talk about how that funding source is used, but it did impact counties directly in funding sources prior, and then the rollout of that funding from Measure 110 has been an abysmal failure, and much of it didn't get the treatment. The board that managed that at OHA was inept and incompetent, and it has had a local effect. Now, because we have an amazing, talented staff and could do more with less, we've done that in Clackamas County, but I think that our value statement should speak to the funding impact directly and the local control of counties. I have more on that. I'm sure it will come up, but those are my initial thoughts on this document to address it. I think that this is a good start, and I'm excited. I mean, when I'm in the AOC meeting yesterday, much of the state is looking at us countywide. The other, I would say 31, 35 other counties in the state are very much looking to us. We're big, we've been competent. Leaders like Mary, we are good at what we do and respected, and even the legislature is talking with us. So I think this value statement's important, and I'm excited that we're close to getting it done.
So Commissioner West, are you going to submit your edits to Kimberly?
I have submitted a lot of edits. I'm not the only voice on this, so some of them some of the things I've already mentioned today have been from staff or whatever, have been already chopped, but it's our document, and I brought them forward again to see what you guys think. It's our decision.
I do think it's important to talk about the funding cuts, and I see nothing wrong in the value statement that's written today at this point in time, referencing the 263 million cuts statewide. Now, the marijuana dollars, as I understand it, and somebody in the room, correct me if I'm wrong, are really taken out of the county's allocation and put towards Measure 110 facilities. And there's not a lot of those Measure 110 facilities in Clackamas County that I'm aware of. There's two. Huh?
Or period.
Yeah, well, there's two. One's right on the border, one's on 82nd. So that was, you know, that hurts us. I do think this document needs to address the flow of funds. I also have some edits that I would like to see here. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, I'm not as well versed as Commissioner West is on this, so I appreciate his passion and his interest and knowledge and experience in this area, as I do the experience of our staff as well, all unique experiences. I just want to just say big picture, I certainly acknowledge the beginning of your statement, Commissioner, and agree that the alcohol and marijuana monies were specifically supposed to go to this cause, this need from the beginning, prior to 110. Yep. So, you know, the question is, for me, how do we maintain that? I won't say in perpetuity, but as long as there's a need out there, right? How do we do that in such a way that a measure does, right? Where it's almost constitutional in a sense, right? It's now a measure, right? So it locks that in. That's a benefit, right? But where I'm confused is where you started out in this conversation as a board with the idea of repealing only, right? And I know right now we're seeing possible reforms, and I don't know what that looks like, and I necessarily don't trust that it's probably going to turn out the way that everyone wants, clearly, because there's different opinions on this, right? So the top of the document says Clackamas County values on proposed changes to Measure 110, not repeal or replace. And I think that's a question we need to really ask ourselves, right? Because it looks different if it's about throw it out the window and repeal it, right? So I am intrigued by the possibility of maybe getting it right and modifying it in the reform aspect, kind of what you're speaking to. And some of the things that stick out for me are how do we lock in and maybe reforming it because if it secures that funding, that intent of the funding might be a benefit to reform versus repeal, right? How do we, this question of local control versus state control of the monies, I do have some reservations. I don't disagree. The question is, if it's formula-based, let's just say on population, it's not a concern. You know, if it is local, and that way I know that one county is not going to use it all up, and at the detriment of other counties that maybe need the funding, right? As they grow into getting the supports and the staffing and the facilities, we're all going to probably, our timing of implementation for the services needed is going to take years, right, to get it all in place. So what I don't know, and maybe some of our staff can tell me, is the funding that is out there today, if it was formula-based on population, is it adequate to meet our needs? Or do we need additional funding? If we need additional funding, then maybe there's another ask in there somewhere that needs to be identified in this. So again, I'm not close to this like you are. I don't have all the answers, but I think that's one thing. The other part is law enforcement, restoring the law enforcement aspects. I think getting to the supply and getting to the culture where it's okay to do this publicly, which I don't believe it is. So I would like to see the law enforcement aspect done in a way that is appropriate. Certainly, I think that there are examples of maybe it going too far, where going after the suppliers and the higher level crimes is important to restore that, but maybe there is part of reform, like, for example, I might get my citation or my misdemeanor waived if I commit to, a 1 year, a long-term monitor. So I'm supportive of those kind of concepts that work for people. But I think we do need to answer the primary question, which the law says, is it going to be reformed? Do we take an issue of let's reform it so we can lock in maybe, if that is a mutual goal, that long-term funding in perpetuity, or go back to where it was a bucket of money that was robbed for other purposes?
Well, I think that first question is the primary question before we get into the document.
Exactly.
Are we reforming or are we repeal, replace?
Thank you. That's my first.
And it's not an easy question, because the assumption and the premise of Measure 110 is really pro-drug. Like, just distill it down. Now, can we get really aggressive and kind of gut this thing? But it's kind of a false choice to say we have to have Measure 110 to have the funding. That's the argument being made.
And it's a false choice.
And it's kind of a false choice.
Commissioners, Ben, we're running up against the clock.
Okay.
And there's commissioners that want to go to a luncheon. I know I do. And 2 commissioners have not spoken yet on this.
Go for it.
Okay, Commissioner Scholl, and then I will speak on this.
On this matter of Measure 110, I'd like us to think about erring on the side of families and kids. I read an article just yesterday where a young man was caught selling drugs to some of our K through 12 kids, and that drug pusher got convicted and sent to jail for 2 years. 2 measly years. I'm concerned that this draft, which I appreciate, Kimberly, your work on this, but I don't want us to capitulate to those people in Salem who are going to want to take Measure 110, make a few changes, and then come up with a situation on our streets that is not significantly different than what we see today. And I believe that what we need here is a very strong statement to our state legislature that we demand a situation, a society, in which somebody who is in possession of killer illegal drugs is charged, tried, and convicted and moved off the street. And that could be to jail, or it could be to a court-mandated treatment. But we cannot have a situation where somebody who is possessed by fentanyl has some sort of say or has the ability to consent to that treatment. In other words, they cannot be allowed to go back on the street, okay? And so again, we need to treat killer drugs, and these are killer drugs. They're killing our people. They're harming our kids, for crying out loud. And treat anybody who possesses, uses, or distributes these killer drugs as a criminal. So again, Mark Scholl says repeal Measure 110, but if we're going to do a document that is going to enable us to parlay with the state legislature, then I would say I want that statement to be a little bit more forceful, that we will not tolerate any more of what Measure 10 has brought to this county and to our streets and to the harm it's done to our families. And number one concern for me is our K through 12 kids. Thank you.
Thank you. The title Why don't we just change the title to Clackamas County Value Statement on Measure 110? Don't have that word changes in there, it doesn't make sense to anybody, okay? You go down to the bulleted points, the first set of bulleted points, the fourth bulleted point says stem the flow. Why not just say eliminate the flow? Stem means nothing to me. You're going to take off 1% of the drugs off the street and therefore, no, eliminate. Going to Commissioner Scholl's point. On the second bullet point on that paragraph, that language does not make sense to me. So that line needs to be rewritten, Kim, and I can help you with that. Thank you very much. So, Commissioners, are we doing this statement to capitulate to the legislature in anticipation of what we think we're going to do? Or are we doing these value statements on what we believe Clackamas County citizens wants? And you better make up your mind. I'm not interested in capitulating to the legislature, who probably will not do anything close to what we're demanding. What if the signature gathering effort is successful and it's on the ballot, and the vote to totally repeal is successful in the state? How does this make our statement look if we're thinking that we're going to somehow reform that? And those are questions, Commissioners, you have not answered for yourselves. So how can we go forward on a statement? And I think the vote to the citizens is infinitely more important than the vote in the legislature, because frankly, I can see the writing on the wall in the legislature right now. They're listening, they're pandering to us. Oh, good idea, good idea. In the end, they're going to pass what they want. They're not going to have significant change, because guess what? Governor Kotek has not even mentioned Measure 110, ever. They're going to pat us on the head, send us on our way, take our money, and throw us some little measly bone, and it's not going to solve the problem. So I suggest, Kim, that I'm not interested in capitulating whatsoever on this, and we may end up in a deadlock on this if we don't. Now, I'm not going to take any more comments on this right now because, Gary, we have a couple more areas of business we need to take care of, and I'm suggesting at your recommendation that we do those tomorrow.
Yes, we can finish the items on the issues list tomorrow, Wednesday, probably right after the second policy session, but we looked at your calendars, no one has a lunch meeting, but are any of you not going to be here tomorrow morning or tomorrow around 11:30 to 12?
Like 11:30 to noon.
Yes.
And if there's time, and if the policy sessions don't take an entire hour, we can come back and revisit this discussion on Measure 110, because I don't think we've had a full discussion that we need on this today. I think, Ben, you have more ideas.
Yep.
You know, Martha's not here to add her opinion on it, and so tomorrow, if we need a further discussion on it, I'm willing to do that, work into the afternoon a little bit longer.
Okay. So I'm going to notice then the remainder of today's issues list and this Measure 110 discussion, we're going to move to tomorrow's, addendum to tomorrow's agenda. We'll start in the morning, and if necessary, we can go into tomorrow afternoon.
That's fine. We'll start tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Got it.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, staff, for showing up. Very nice. We have an important luncheon to attend today. Seeing no further business before this commission, we are adjourned.